Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Real Life Friday. We're going to do another cooking lesson today. Today we're going to make fried rice. Fried rice is a great way to take a bunch of what seem to be random ingredients, things you might just have stacking up in your refrigerator, maybe some old leftovers, and bringing them together into one really delicious dish. So let me run you through the ingredients you're going to need. So for fried rice, of course you're going to need some rice. Actually, leftover rice is even better than fresh rice for this, because sometimes fresh rice is a little too sticky. It's actually better if you've got some leftover rice. If you don't have leftover rice, you can always cook a batch of rice and then you put it out on a sheet pan and actually let it dry out a little bit, and then you could use that. I've got some leftover, kind of like a wild rice there. Any rice you've got, white rice, wild rice, it'll all work. Then you want to have some kind of a protein component for that. And this is where using up some leftovers really comes in handy. So we had some leftover pork tenderloin, and I just used that, cut it up into little diced pieces. You could use pretty much any protein you want here. If you have some leftover chicken, if you have some leftover shrimp, you have some leftover beef maybe from steak, anything you could cut up into little bite-sized pieces will work great for this. Then you're going to want some kind of a vegetable element. And this is where it's just what you have available. Today we're going to be using some cauliflower. It would maybe be more traditional to use broccoli, but hey, they're related. They taste kind of similar. It's a similar texture. We're going to roll with it. We also had some mushrooms in the refrigerator. We had just a handful of mushrooms left. This is a great way to use up some leftover mushrooms. You want to have an egg. They usually use an egg right at the end to kind of bring everything together. If you've ever had fried rice, you'll notice there's usually a little bit of egg in there. I'm going to be using a little bit of garlic. Garlic is a really traditional flavor in Chinese food. If I had some ginger around, I might use that too. That's another really traditional flavor. We're going to be using some toasted sesame oil. Now, that's something that's going to give it a really kind of like Asian cuisine flavor. You don't have to have sesame oil for this. Any kind of oil you've got in the house will work fine. So if you have canola oil or vegetable oil, corn oil, you can use any of those. But if you've got something that's got a little flavor to it, that's even better. And definitely to give it that Asian kind of flavor, you want to have some soy sauce. Now, if you don't have like a bottle of soy sauce, I bet you have soy sauce in the house. I bet if you go in that drawer where you have all those leftover packets, we have all that Chick-fil-A sauce containers and dip sauces and all that, I bet you've got at least a packet of soy sauce. And really, you only need maybe one packet for this. You don't need much. So let's get this thing going. I've got a pan going here. Now I'm using a big non-stick pan. If you have a wok, use that, of course. But not many people have a wok. So if you've got just a big non-stick pan, that'll work. I've got it going on about medium heat. So I'm going to put in our oil. I'm going to start with maybe a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half of oil in there. And the first thing you want to get going is your raw vegetables. The rice is already cooked. My protein is already cooked, so those don't need to go in first. I'm going to get my cauliflower in there, and I'm going to get our mushrooms in here, and I'm going to get our garlic in here. Now, I'm going to use just a tiny bit of salt in here. That soy sauce that we're going to use later is going to give it a really salty flavor. You don't want to use a lot of salt. I'm just using this salt because when you cook raw vegetables, the salt actually helps to draw out the moisture from the vegetables, and it helps to get the cooking process going with them. Now, as I get this going, you'll notice that I'm using a rubber spatula. You could use a rubber spatula or you could use a wooden spoon, but when you're using a non-stick pan like this, it's really important that you don't want to use anything that's metal. Because if you use metal on a non-stick pan, it scrapes off that surface that actually makes it non-stick. And that's bad for a couple of reasons. Number one, you're going to get all this weird chemically kind of stuff going into your food, and you don't want that. The other thing is, if you wear off that non-stick coating, it's not going to be a non-stick pan anymore. I bet you have a pan in your house, I know we do, that's supposed to be a non-stick pan, and it's not non-stick anymore. And usually that's because you've worn that non-stick coating off. Now that'll wear off in the dishwasher after a while too, but you don't want to speed that process up. So if you're using non-stick, you definitely want to use a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon. Now you can hear this is cooking away. You want to have this on a pretty high heat. If you've ever seen guys cooking with woks, you notice that they're always keeping the food moving around. That's because they're cooking over a really, really high heat. And if you leave it in any one spot in the pan, you're going to end up burning it. So you want this to cook pretty quickly. So I'm going to let that go for just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready. Our rice is going to be the next thing to go in. Now, fried rice is really a Chinese American dish. I had the awesome opportunity to travel to China a couple of years ago with Go Global NC and a bunch of other teachers, and we ate some amazing food. And at all the meals that we had, we never really saw fried rice. Actually, they would bring rice out, but rice always came towards the end of the meal. They explained to us that in China, when you're feeding guests and having a special meal, you would always give the rice last because you wanted to give the impression that you weren't just trying to fill up your guest with rice, that you're really bringing them out lots of meats and lots of vegetables, and that's a way to honor your guest. So when we were in China, I actually ate very little rice. I was really more interested in all the different meats and vegetables that they brought out, the soups and the broths that they brought out. The rice usually came out towards the end of the meal, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really remember eating a whole lot of rice. I was really focused on everything else. So now that our vegetables are starting to cook, they call it sweating the vegetables down. It's because they're releasing some of their the water that's inside of them, their own juices. Now that these are getting going, I'm going to go ahead and add our rice in here. So again, when you're using this high heat kind of cooking, you want to keep the food moving around. The rice is already cooked, so really all we're doing right now is heating it up. We're not really cooking the rice. The other vegetables, they're still cooking a little bit more as we heat up the rice. But yeah, they don't need to spend a whole lot of time in here. So now that I got the rice in there going, I'm going to go ahead and get our protein. Remember, we're using some leftover pork that we had. Again, you could use whatever you had. Some leftover chicken. A really good would be shrimp if you had some leftover shrimp, getting that in there. So again, I'm just going to keep moving this around so that it doesn't burn in any one particular spot in the pan. And now that that's starting to warm through, now I can start bringing some more flavor in here. So that's where I'm going to bring in the soy sauce. Now you don't want to go overboard with the soy sauce because it's already very salty. And this is one of those things that's going to really give it that Chinese flavor, that Asian food flavor. Like I said, if you had some ginger, that would be really good to add in. If you had Chinese 5 spice, that's another one that's really tasty. So again, I'm only adding maybe at the most, say 2 teaspoons. This is one of the reasons why I cook on top of the stove and I don't do a whole lot of baking, because when you bake, you have to measure everything. It's very important. Baking is science. This kind of cooking, it's by taste and it's by eye and it's by smell and it's by hearing. You hearing the food cooking. My wife is the one that handles the cooking in the oven and the measuring things out. That's never been my skill set. So now that we got this going, we're ready for pretty much our last step, and that's adding that egg in. Now, if you're ever adding an egg into something that you've already got cooking, I would always suggest crack the egg into a bowl separate. If I crack this in there and I get shell in there, it's going to be a real problem trying to get all that back out. So I'm going to go ahead and crack this into a separate bowl, especially since you're going to want to scramble this. You don't want to put it in as like a fried egg, a single egg. You want this to kind of go all through this fried rice. So once I've got this scrambled up, I'm just going to add this in and stir it through immediately. I don't want it to cook all in one spot. I want it to be all throughout our fried rice. And it cooks very quickly because you remember, we're cooking over a high heat. An egg doesn't need a whole lot of time to cook. So guys, we are just about there. I'm just going to give this another couple of turns and let that egg finish cooking through. Let me clear us a spot so I can serve this up. So hopefully you can go back through now that we're all kind of stuck at home. We don't have a whole lot of groceries. We don't have a whole lot of options. This is the kind of thing that you can tie together just a handful of ingredients and end up with something that's really kind of delicious. right. You're not getting the exciting side of me serving this up, but let me do the big reveal for you. Here we go. Ready? Boom. And there it is. There's our fried rice, featuring a lot of leftover items, and it's going to turn out to be delicious for us. So, there's your recipe for today. I hope you enjoy it. Take care of yourselves and others. See you soon. Bye-bye.